The snowflakes fell gently, creating a serene blanket over the quiet suburban neighborhood. The world outside was hushed, save for the sound of tires crunching the snow-covered roads. Liam drove with one hand on the wheel, his other resting gently on the dashboard as he stole glances at his daughter in the passenger seat. Ella, bundled in layers to fight off the winter chill, looked out the window, her gaze distant but thoughtful. Her disability often made the simplest tasks a challenge, but Liam always made sure she knew she wasn't alone in the struggle. They'd just left the doctor's office, the weight of the visit hanging between them. As they neared home, Liam's phone buzzed with an incoming message. He glanced at it, a notification from the Homeowners Association, a new complaint. His fingers tightened around the steering wheel as his eyes scanned the message. It was from Karen, the notorious HOA member known for her rigid rules and control over the neighborhood. The complaint was about their driveway. Apparently, it had not been cleared to her satisfaction, a violation of the HOA's policy. Liam sighed, dismissing the message with a swipe. He was used to Karen's petty demands, the constant need for her to assert dominance over everyone in the neighborhood. But as they pulled into their driveway, something felt off. The air was still, too still. Liam's gaze darted toward the edge of the property. The familiar silhouette of Karen's car wasn't parked on the street, but there was a distant hum, something mechanical, a subtle whirring sound in the air. A drone. Liam's heart skipped a beat. It hovered just above the treetops, unmoving, watching. He felt a knot tighten in his stomach but shook it off. Probably just someone flying a drone for fun, he thought, but the hairs on the back of his neck stood up, and for the first time that day, a sense of unease washed over him. Ella turned to look at him, sensing the change in his demeanor. Her soft voice broke the silence. "Dad, what's wrong?" Liam smiled reassuringly, though the tension in his chest remained. "Nothing, sweetie. Let's get inside and warm up." But deep down, he knew something was about to go terribly wrong. The drone lingered, and with it, the feeling that they were being watched by someone who meant them harm. The car rolled to a stop in the driveway, the sound of the tires crunching against the thick blanket of snow, the only noise in the otherwise silent night. Liam glanced at the house, a familiar sight, but one that felt colder tonight, somehow more distant. The lights inside flickered faintly, their glow doing little to push back the darkness that seemed to have crept into the walls. The weight of the day, of the endless struggles, settled heavily on his shoulders as he opened the door to let Ella out. She was slow to move, her legs weak from the cold, and the toll her disability took on her every step. Liam reached for her, lifting her carefully into his arms as he always did, trying to be as gentle as possible. He could see the exhaustion on her face, the effort it took for her just to stay upright. He'd long ago learned the hard way that every task, every movement for her, was an obstacle no matter how small. Still, he would do anything for her. "Almost there, kiddo," Liam said, giving her a smile that didn't quite reach his eyes. Ella offered a small, tired smile in return, her hands clutching at his coat as he carried her inside. Before he could make it to the door, his phone buzzed in his pocket. He sighed, setting Ella down gently by the doorframe before pulling it out. It was a notification from the HOA, and as his thumb hovered over the message, he already knew who it was. Karen, the relentless, overbearing member of the Homeowners Association who took every rule and regulation as a personal mission to enforce. "Hello, Liam." The text began and Liam's stomach turned. "I'm afraid I've noticed your driveway has not been properly cleared of snow. As per the HOA guidelines, this is a violation of our agreement. You have until the end of the day to clear the driveway, or I will be forced to impose penalties." Liam's grip on the phone tightened. He couldn't believe it again. He had just barely finished dealing with a prior complaint from her about a dead shrub in the yard, and now this. Just then, the phone rang. The name on the screen made his blood run cold. Karen Monroe. "Hello, Liam." Karen's voice was clipped condescending as usual. "I trust you've seen the message I sent about your driveway?" Liam pinched the bridge of his nose, trying to suppress his frustration. "Yes, Karen. I've seen it. I'm handling it, but it's snowing heavily out there. It'll take me a little while longer. I don't care if it's snowing, Liam, she shot back, her tone icy. Your driveway needs to be clear. We agreed on this. If it's not cleared by tomorrow morning, I'll be filing a formal complaint with the association. We don't want a repeat of last year's issues, do we? Her words stung, and Liam gritted his teeth. The last thing he needed was another confrontation. But he knew it was coming, as it always did with her. I'll take care of it, Karen. I'm sure it's fine for tonight. He was about to hang up when Karen added, her voice low and almost menacing, and Liam, if it's not done by morning, you'll regret it. Trust me. The line went dead before Liam could respond. He stared at the screen, the cold wind biting at his face as it pushed through the door. He turned to look at Ella, still sitting quietly by the door. Her face had turned pale, her breath shallow. Are you okay, honey? He asked gently. She nodded, but the concern in her eyes made his chest tighten. I'm fine, Dad, she whispered, but the words didn't carry the weight of conviction. Liam went to work clearing his driveway, trying to put Karen out of his mind. The storm was fierce, but he was used to this, used to pushing through despite the fatigue and the struggle. However, just as he cleared the last patch of snow, he noticed something strange, the familiar hum of a drone in the distance. It was soft at first, almost imperceptible, but as he looked up, he saw it, a dark shape against the snow-filled sky, hovering just beyond the tree-line. Liam's pulse quickened, and he felt his gut twist with unease. He dismissed the feeling, telling himself it was just some neighborhood kid playing with a toy. But as he turned to head back inside, something caught his eye. A shadow in the window. Someone or something moving behind the curtains. His breath hitched as he realized the drone hadn't been the only thing watching. Liam quickly grabbed Ella, pulling her inside and locking the door behind him. We're safe, kiddo, he said, trying to hide the tremble in his voice. But deep down, he knew they weren't. Not yet. Not with Karen's threats hanging over them and whatever or whoever had been watching them from outside. The feeling of being trapped was becoming all too real. The wind howled outside, cutting through the cold with relentless fury. Snowflakes swirled in chaotic patterns, the storm showing no signs of easing. Liam pulled his coat tighter around his shoulders, his breath visible in the frigid air as he stood at the edge of the driveway, his hands gripping the shovel. The snow was thick and the task was daunting, but he had no choice. He needed to clear the driveway, or the threat from Karen would become a reality. Every muscle in his body screamed in protest, the exhaustion from the day's events weighing heavily on him. But he couldn't stop, not when his daughter, Ella, was inside, vulnerable and alone. Inside the house, Ella sat huddled in a blanket by the fireplace, trying to keep warm. The house, usually full of life and laughter, now felt empty and cold, the quiet broken only by the occasional crackling of the fire. Ella's fragile health made her susceptible to the cold, and her disability left her struggling even more than usual. Her pale face was framed by her messy hair, and she tried to push through the discomfort, curling her hands into fists to fight the fatigue that had started to take over. As Liam shoveled the snow, he felt the weight of the world on his shoulders. Karen had threatened him once again, and the thought of dealing with her made his blood boil. The power she wielded through the HOA was oppressive, and her tone on the phone had been cruel, demanding that he clear the driveway or face harsh consequences. Liam's mind raced with frustration, but he focused on the task, knowing that if he didn't act, it would only escalate further. But as he worked, a sudden, jarring voice broke through the howling wind. Liam. He froze, his shovel half buried in the snow, as Karen's voice cut through the storm. She stood in his front yard, her arms crossed tightly over her chest as she glared at him, her face set in an expression of disdain. The storm whipped around her, but she didn't seem to mind the cold. It was clear she wasn't here to check on his progress. She was here to demand more. What the hell are you doing out here, Karen? Liam's voice was strained with frustration, but he quickly wiped his face, trying to keep his composure. Karen stepped forward, her boots crunching against the snow as she advanced toward him. You know the rules, Liam. The driveway needs to be clear by morning, or I'll report this to the HOA. I won't let you get away with it this time, she spat, her voice icy with authority. Liam clenched his jaw, resisting the urge to shout. I'm doing it right now. But it's snowing, Karen. I'm doing the best I can. His voice wavered slightly, a mixture of exhaustion and exasperation. Karen's eyes narrowed as she took a step closer, her tone dismissive. I don't care about the snow. You know the rules. And if it's not cleared, you'll be facing penalties. You'll regret not doing things properly. She paused, her lips curling into a smirk. And don't expect me to help. That's not my responsibility, Liam. Liam's blood boiled at her callousness, but before he could respond, Karen turned and marched back toward her car, leaving Liam standing in the snow, fists clenched. The nerve of her, he thought, bitterly. She didn't care about the storm, didn't care about his daughter, and certainly didn't care about the burden she was placing on him. Liam shook his head and returned to the driveway, his heart pounding in his chest. He didn't notice the drone hovering above, capturing every interaction. He was too focused on clearing the snow. He had no idea that everything was being recorded, the threat of Karen's cruelty, the way she abandoned Ella without a second thought, and the growing storm outside. He continued to shovel, determined to finish, unaware that this moment would set everything into motion. Inside the house, Ella's tired eyes watched through the window, feeling a sense of unease. She didn't understand it all, but she knew something was wrong. She could see her father outside, struggling in the cold, while Karen had just walked away without a care. It was clear that things were going to get much worse, and Ella couldn't shake the feeling that they were being watched by someone who wasn't just observing, but who would soon make their presence known. The storm continued to rage outside, its intensity now matched only by the simmering anger that boiled inside Liam. He stood in the driveway, shovel in hand, the cold wind biting through his jacket and stinging his face. His muscles ached with exhaustion, but he couldn't stop. He couldn't let Karen have the satisfaction of knowing she'd gotten him. Every time he thought about her cruel words, her smirk as she walked away, it fueled his determination to finish clearing the driveway. He'd learned long ago that when someone like her came after you, the only option was to keep fighting, no matter how weary you felt. But the storm was more than just a physical challenge. It was also a mental battle. He'd been juggling the pressure of caring for Ella, the constant worries about her health, and now this relentless assault from Karen. He wasn't used to asking for help, and the idea of relying on anyone made him feel weak. The thought of her, Karen, so indifferent to the struggles of others, added to his frustration, deepening his resolve to protect his daughter at all costs. Inside, the house was silent except for the sound of the wind whipping against the windows. Ella, alone and vulnerable, sat on the couch wrapped in her blanket. The fire flickered in the hearth, but the warmth didn't quite reach her as she sat shivering. Her disability made even the simplest tasks feel like insurmountable hurdles, and right now, the snowstorm made everything worse. She had already felt the isolation, the quiet distance between her and the rest of the world, but now, with her father outside in the freezing cold and Karen nowhere to be found, she couldn't shake the feeling of abandonment. Ella's hand trembled as she picked up the phone from the table beside her. She dialed a number she knew by heart, her father's, but the phone line went dead. He wasn't answering. Desperation gripped her as she tried again, but the same result followed. Liam was still outside, and she felt the fear claw at her chest. In her mind, her father was always her protector, the one who shielded her from harm. But right now, she felt more vulnerable than ever. She set the phone down and reached for the window, parting the curtains just enough to see outside. Through the blinding snow, she saw her father still working on the driveway, the dark figure of Karen no longer visible. The uneasy feeling in her stomach deepened as she noticed something else. A shadow moving just beyond the edge of the yard. A drone. She didn't know why it unsettled her so much, but the drone was there, suspended above the trees, watching them. She pulled back from the window, her mind racing with confusion and fear. Karen had gone. Her father was still working. But the drone, why was it hovering so closely? And who was controlling it? The fear lingered, thick and suffocating, like the storm that seemed to mirror the emotions swirling in her chest. Back outside, Liam paused, wiping sweat from his brow despite the freezing cold. The shovel scraped against the pavement, a repetitive sound that brought little relief. He turned around, checking to make sure Ella was still okay. But as he glanced back toward the house, he caught a glimpse of something that made his heart skip a beat, a faint shadow moving against the snow. He immediately froze. A drone, a small black shape hovering above the trees. It wasn't just any drone. It was clearly focused on him, tracking his every move. He felt a wave of unease spread through his chest, his skin prickling as the thought crossed his mind. Someone was watching him. At first, he told himself it was nothing, maybe just a neighbor's drone or a passing hobbyist. But as he watched it hover, unmoving, something inside him told him otherwise. He quickly reached into his pocket and pulled out his phone, the cold making it difficult to operate the touchscreen. When the screen lit up, he saw the message notification from Karen again. His grip tightened. Her words echoed in his mind. "You'll regret not doing things properly." The pieces began to click together in an instant. Karen's message, the drone, the timing of it all, it couldn't be a coincidence. As he scanned the yard, he suddenly noticed the faint whirring sound of the drone growing louder, closer. It wasn't just passing by, it was filming him. With his heart racing, Liam opened the camera app on his phone and quickly turned on the video recorder, trying to capture the drone's movement. As the drone hovered in place, Liam's thoughts raced. Who would send it? Who was behind it? Was Karen really watching him from behind the scenes, controlling the drone? He couldn't shake the feeling that everything was a setup, a carefully orchestrated move to push him into a corner. Suddenly, the drone dipped low, almost as if it was coming closer to him. Liam's stomach turned. He grabbed the shovel again, not sure why he needed it, whether to protect himself or just to channel his anxiety into something physical. The drone was too close, and he felt exposed. He was being watched, but he didn't know by whom. He turned and hurried back inside, his eyes darting back toward the window. But by the time he reached the door, the drone was gone. Inside, his instincts kicked in. He called the local authorities, hoping to get some clarity on the situation, but the line was filled with bureaucratic delays. The dispatcher took his information, but seemed more interested in processing his call than understanding the urgency of his predicament. Frustrated, Liam slammed the phone down. He needed answers, and fast, but he couldn't shake the suspicion that Karen had something to do with the drone. Something about the way she had left so quickly, and her earlier threats didn't sit right with him. And then the drone, it was too coincidental. He grabbed his laptop and logged into the HOA's online portal, desperately searching for any hint that Karen had orchestrated this. The frustration mounted as he sifted through emails, documents, and records until he found what he was looking for. Hidden among the HOA's correspondence, there was a thread of emails between Karen and several contractors, all discussing ways to keep tabs on specific residents. Liam's name was mentioned several times. The pieces finally fell into place. This wasn't just a complaint, it was an attack that had been planned well in advance. Liam's blood ran cold as the truth became undeniable. Karen wasn't just a strict HOA member, she was manipulating the rules for her own gain. She had used the HOA to create division, to spy on the very people she was supposed to be serving, and now, with the drone footage, it seemed she had been watching their every move, plotting her next step. His mind raced, filled with anger, confusion, and a need to protect Ella. This was no longer just about a driveway or a snowstorm. This was about something far more sinister, and Liam wasn't going to let her get away with it. Liam's heart raced as he stared at the screen of his laptop, his fingers trembling slightly as he scrolled through the HOA's correspondence. The drone footage, which had seemed like an ominous but unrelated detail at first, now felt like a damning piece of the puzzle. The realization hit him like a gut punch. This was no accident. Karen wasn't just a petty neighbor. She was orchestrating something much darker. The evidence, though subtle at first, was now glaring. He sat back in his chair, trying to process everything. The more he dug, the clearer it became. Karen had been manipulating the HOA for years, using her position of power to control and intimidate the people in the neighborhood. The emails he'd uncovered were filled with sinister undertones, all directed at specific individuals, Liam included. She had been watching him and his family long before the complaint about the driveway had ever been made. But it wasn't just about a snow-covered driveway or petty grievances, it was about control. Karen had turned the HOA into a weapon. She was the puppet master, pulling strings behind the scenes to create division and fear. The screen flickered, and Liam's eyes scanned over the most recent email thread. His name mentioned again. Liam's house, the email read, "Too many violations. Needs to be watched closely." A cold shiver ran down his spine as the truth settled in. The drone wasn't just surveillance, it was a tool. A tool for someone who had gone far beyond just following the rules. She wanted him to suffer. She wanted him to break. And the worst part was that he had been completely oblivious, blind to the careful manipulation at play. His mind raced with 1,000 thoughts. How had he missed it? He was so focused on the immediate task of clearing the driveway and protecting Ella, but the bigger picture had always been just out of sight. Karen had been plotting this for so long, building her power, keeping tabs on everyone in the neighborhood. Now, her obsession with him had crossed a dangerous line. She wasn't just meddling in his life, she was trying to destroy it. Liam clenched his fists, anger and betrayal seething inside him. His gut twisted, not just with rage, but with something far more painful, guilt. He had been so focused on doing the right thing for Ella, so focused on keeping the peace, that he hadn't realized how vulnerable they both were. Ella, his precious daughter, had been left alone in that house, vulnerable and unprotected, all while Karen watched. The thought made Liam sick. A sharp pang of worry hit him in his chest as he glanced over at the door to the living room. He could hear Ella in the other room, but her soft coughs and the occasional wheeze reached his ears with an unsettling clarity. His mind flashed back to earlier, when she had been so tired and withdrawn. The storm had worsened, and the air inside the house felt colder than ever. Panic gripped him as he quickly closed the laptop, tossing it aside. He rushed to the living room. Finding Ella sitting on the couch, her cheeks flushed and her breath labored. Her fragile form looked even smaller in the dim light, her body curled inward as though trying to hold herself together. "Ella," Liam whispered, his voice thick with concern as he knelt in front of her. He placed a hand on her forehead, his heart sinking as he felt the heat radiating from her skin. "You're burning up. Why didn't you tell me?" "I'm fine, Dad," Ella said weakly, her voice barely above a whisper. But the tremble in her voice gave her away. "No, sweetheart, you're not fine," Liam replied, his voice trembling now. He took a step back, a surge of fear flooding his chest. He knew her health had always been fragile, but this was different. This wasn't just a cold, it was worse. It had to be. With panic creeping into his every thought, Liam quickly grabbed his phone, dialing the emergency number. As the phone rang, he glanced back at Ella, her small body shivering under the blanket. His mind flashed back to the emails he had just uncovered, the ones that had revealed Karen's insidious plot. He'd been so focused on her and the snowstorm that he hadn't noticed his own daughter slipping through the cracks, exposed and vulnerable in ways he couldn't have imagined. A voice on the other end of the phone interrupted his thoughts. "Sir, what's the emergency?" "Ella. She's not okay. I need help. Fast," Liam said, his voice shaking with a mix of fear and helplessness. As he listened to the instructions from the operator, his mind stayed fixated on the emails and the twisted game that Karen had been playing all along. His fight wasn't just against a neighborhood bully. It was against a system that had been corrupted, a system that had systematically taken away his ability to protect his family. The stakes had escalated beyond anything he could have ever imagined. Now his daughter was suffering the consequences, and Liam knew, deep down, that this wasn't just a storm, it was the beginning of something far more dangerous. Liam was trapped in more ways than one. The world outside may have been covered in snow, but inside, the storm had only just begun. The twisted power dynamics had shifted, and he was left trying to hold everything together, knowing that Karen was just getting started. And this time, Ella would pay the price. The storm was a fury that matched the turmoil inside Liam's chest. Winds howled, rattling the windows, and the snow came down harder, swirling in blinding gusts. The house, now isolated from the rest of the world, felt more like a prison than a sanctuary. The roads were impassable, and the night stretched endlessly before him. Inside, the flickering light of the fire cast long shadows across the room, but there was no warmth in the house, only cold, an overwhelming chill that seemed to settle into every corner. Liam stood at the window, watching the storm rage outside. His hand gripped the phone tightly as the emergency dispatcher's voice faded into background noise. The truth was clear now. Karen hadn't just created problems with the HOA to harass him. She had orchestrated everything, weaving a web of lies and manipulation that had led to this moment. And now his daughter was suffering because of it. The fear for Ella's safety gnawed at him. He knew the fire in her lungs had worsened, and every time she coughed, it sounded like a desperate plea for help. He felt utterly powerless. The authorities were slow to respond, the roads were blocked, and there was nothing he could do except wait. But his mind kept turning, focused on the events that had led up to this moment. The drone, the emails, and now Karen's relentless assault on their lives. He couldn't wait any longer. Turning toward the living room, Liam's eyes locked on Ella, who lay on the couch, wrapped in blankets, but still shivering. She looked fragile, too pale under the dim light, her chest rising and falling with labored breaths. His heart shattered at the sight, but there was no time for tears. He had to act. Liam grabbed his coat, his fingers trembling as he zipped it up and headed for the door. But as he opened it, a gust of freezing wind slammed into him, pushing him back. His gaze immediately fixed on the shadows at the edge of his yard, the outline of Karen's car barely visible through the snow. His breath caught. She was here, in the middle of the storm, when all logic suggested she should have been holed up in her warm home. Karen had come to deliver the final blow. With a rush of adrenaline, Liam slammed the door shut behind him, his mind set on confronting the woman who had turned his life upside down. He moved quickly, almost instinctively, walking toward her car. The storm felt like an enemy in itself, but his anger and desperation pushed him forward. His boots crunched in the snow as he made his way across the yard, his eyes never leaving the car. When he reached it, he saw her sitting in the driver's seat, looking perfectly composed despite the chaos outside. Karen stared out the windshield, her hands firmly gripping the steering wheel. There was a cold satisfaction in her eyes as she saw him approach, as if she had been waiting for this moment. "Liam," she said, her voice clipped, her tone colder than the night itself. "I knew you'd come eventually, but this is where it ends." Liam's jaw tightened as he stood inches from her window. "You've gone too far this time, Karen," he said, his voice low and steady despite the storm brewing inside him. "I know everything. The drone, the emails, your manipulation of the HOA. You've been controlling this whole neighborhood from the shadows, including me. You used me as a pawn in your sick game, and I'm done playing." Karen raised an eyebrow, a slight smirk tugging at her lips. "You think you have it all figured out? I was just doing what needed to be done. People like you, Liam, you think you can get away with breaking the rules. But I won't let that happen. Not in my neighborhood." Liam's fists clenched. "You left my daughter alone in there. You let her suffer while you hid behind your little rules and games. You don't care about anyone but yourself. But you're not going to win. Not this time." Karen's smirk faltered for the briefest moment, but she quickly regained her composure. "You think this changes anything? You've got no proof. No one will believe you. The HOA will side with me like they always do. And as for the drone footage, well, let's just say I have it all under control." Liam's pulse quickened, his eyes narrowing as the full weight of her words sank in. "You don't have control anymore, Karen. You've already lost. It's over." Reaching into his pocket, he pulled out his phone and handed it to her through the window. The footage was there. The video of the drone watching them, of Karen abandoning Ella, of her threats and manipulations exposed for the world to see. The emails, the manipulations, the conspiracy to drive him into this corner, it was all laid out in front of her. You can deny it all you want, Liam continued, his voice a mix of anger and determination, but this is proof. The world is going to know exactly what you've been doing, and you won't get away with it. For a long moment, Karen didn't say anything. Her eyes flicked back and forth between the footage and Liam's face, the smug expression slowly slipping from her features. Her fingers gripped the steering wheel tighter, the realization settling in that she was no longer the puppet master she thought herself to be. Liam took a step back, his stance unwavering. "I'm going to take this to the authorities, Karen, and once the world sees what you've done, your little reign of terror is over." Karen didn't respond at first. Then her expression hardened. "You think this is over?" she sneered. "You're nothing. You always have been. The HOA will cover for me. They always do. And if you try to turn this against me, you'll see what happens next." Liam's heart raced. He knew the fight wasn't over. Karen was still dangerous, and the HOA still had power. But Liam had a weapon now. He had the truth. And truth had a way of breaking even the most powerful walls. He turned away from the car and started back toward the house, his mind swirling with the next steps. He wasn't sure how the rest of this would unfold. But one thing was certain, he would not let Karen control his life any longer. He would expose her, fight for his family, and do whatever it took to ensure Ella's safety. As Liam reached the door, he paused and turned back to look at Karen, whose car still lingered in the storm's fury. She wasn't done yet, but neither was he. This was just the beginning. He had the truth, and with that he would fight no matter the cost. The storm, which had raged relentlessly through the night, finally began to subside. The fierce winds calmed, the blinding snowflakes softened, and the world outside appeared still and untouched, as if the violence of the previous hours had never been. But inside the house, the chaos of the past few days hung thick in the air. The weight of what had transpired, the danger, the lies, everything that had brought them to this moment, lingered like a heavy fog. Liam stood by the window, his eyes staring out into the clearing morning, though his thoughts were miles away. The authorities had finally arrived. After hours of waiting, his phone had rung with the call he had been waiting for. The detective had seen the footage, and the response had been swift. With the evidence Liam had provided, it was clear that Karen's control over the neighborhood and the HOA would be exposed. The authorities were moving quickly, and the charges were mounting. But even as Karen faced legal consequences, her manipulations unraveling in the cold light of truth, Liam felt no sense of victory. There was no satisfaction in knowing that she would be held accountable. What she had done, the harm she had caused, was deeper than any legal punishment could address. The damage had been done, and it was something that couldn't be undone, not for him, not for Ella. "Dad," Ella's soft voice broke his reverie, pulling him back to the present. He turned around to see her standing in the living room doorway, her frail form wrapped in blankets, her face pale, but with a faint glimmer of hope in her eyes. She was no longer the same fragile child who had been confined to the couch the night before. The fever had broken, and though she was still weak, there was a lightness in her that had been absent for days. "Hey, sweetheart," Liam said gently, walking over to her and kneeling down. "How are you feeling?" Ella smiled weakly, her eyes searching his face. "Better, Dad. I'm not as cold anymore." Liam reached out to touch her forehead, relieved to find it no longer burning with fever. She still looked tired, but the worst of it seemed to be behind them. "I'm glad," he whispered, his voice thick with emotion. "I'm so sorry you had to go through all of this. I never should have let you down." Ella shook her head, her hand reaching out to touch his. "You didn't let me down, Dad," she said softly, her voice hoarse but steady. "You've always been there for me. You always protect me." The simple words hit him like a wave. He had done everything he could to shield her, but for so long he had been blind to the deeper currents swirling around them. Karen, the HOA, the manipulation, it had all been right under his nose, and he hadn't seen it. But in that moment, as he looked into his daughter's eyes, the guilt began to dissipate. It wasn't about the past, it was about the future. He could protect her now. He would fight for her every single day. The doorbell rang, interrupting the quiet moment. Liam stood and walked to the door, his heart still heavy with the weight of everything that had transpired. When he opened it, Detective Harper stood there, a solemn look on her face. "We have the statement from Karen," she said, her voice firm but compassionate. "She's been arrested. We have enough evidence to move forward with charges for harassment, intimidation, and unlawful surveillance, among other things. The HOA is under investigation, too, and will be reaching out to the other residents who've been affected." Liam nodded, his throat tight with emotion. "Thank you. I don't know how to thank you." Detective Harper gave him a sympathetic smile. "You don't need to thank me. You did the right thing, Liam. You protected your daughter, and that's the most important thing. We'll take care of the rest." As the door closed behind her, Liam felt a strange sense of relief, though it was bittersweet. Karen would face the consequences of her actions, and the neighborhood, which had been under her thumb for so long, would begin to heal. But the scars of what had happened, of the manipulation, the betrayal, and the fear would take time to fade. Back in the living room, Ella had sat back down on the couch, her eyes following Liam with quiet curiosity. He could see that she was still processing everything, still trying to make sense of it all. Her innocence had been shaken by the events, but there was a strength in her now, a quiet resilience that had always been there, even when she didn't know it. Liam joined her on the couch, sitting beside her and pulling her into a gentle hug. "We're going to be okay, Ella. I promise. You don't have to be afraid anymore." Ella nestled into his arms, her breathing steady, and for the first time in days, Liam allowed himself to exhale. The fear that had consumed him, the constant dread of what Karen might do next, of what could happen to his daughter, was beginning to lift. They had survived, and they would continue to survive, together. The healing had begun, not just for Ella, but for both of them. The scars would remain, but they were no longer defined by the trauma they had endured. They were defined by the strength they had found in each other. And with that, Liam knew they could face whatever came next. As the morning sun finally broke through the clouds, shining into the room, Liam looked out the window one last time. The storm had passed, the world outside was still and calm, and in his heart he felt a sense of peace, one that had eluded him for so long. They had weathered the storm, and though the path ahead was uncertain, he knew one thing for sure: he would always fight for his family. Always. The morning light filtered softly through the half-drawn curtains, casting a warm glow across the living room. The storm had finally passed, leaving a blanket of fresh snow on the ground outside, untouched and pristine. The world seemed still, as if holding its breath after the chaos of the past few days. Inside, the house felt different. There was a new sense of calm in the air, a quiet peace that hadn't been there before. Liam sat on the couch, his arm around Ella, who was nestled beside him, her head resting on his shoulder. They hadn't spoken much since Detective Harper had left, but the weight of the ordeal seemed to have lifted from their shoulders. Ella was quieter than usual, her small hand curled around his, but Liam could feel the unspoken relief between them. They had made it through the worst of it. "We're going to be okay, Dad," Ella said, her voice soft but steady as she gazed out the window at the serene landscape outside. The snow sparkled in the sunlight, and for a moment, it felt as if they were finally free of the shadows that had loomed over them for so long. Liam nodded, pressing a kiss to the top of her head. "Yeah, we are." For the first time in days, he allowed himself to relax, his guard lowering just a little. The nightmare that Karen had dragged them through seemed to be behind them now, and he couldn't help but feel a glimmer of hope that life might finally return to normal. They had survived the storm, both literal and figurative, and it seemed like the worst was over. But just as he leaned back, closing his eyes and allowing the warmth of the moment to sink in, a faint sound reached his ears, a low hum. It was distant, almost imperceptible, but Liam recognized it immediately. The unmistakable sound of a drone. His heart skipped a beat, and he straightened up, looking around the room. The peaceful quiet was shattered, replaced by the sharp tension that had plagued him just days before. He glanced out the window, squinting against the brightness of the snow, and his eyes narrowed as he saw it, a small black dot in the sky, hovering just beyond the tree line. The drone. Liam's breath caught in his throat as the realization hit him. Karen hadn't been the only one watching. Whoever had been controlling that drone, whoever had been behind it, was still out there. The threat wasn't over. It had only just begun. He turned quickly to Ella, who had also heard the sound, her eyes wide with uncertainty. "Ella, stay here," Liam said, his voice urgent but calm. He stood, his feet heavy on the floor as he moved toward the door. But before he could reach the handle, he stopped, his gaze drawn back to the window. There in the distance, standing just beyond the edge of the property line, was a figure. A shadow, barely visible against the backdrop of the snow, but unmistakably human. The figure didn't move, but Liam could feel the tension in the air as if it were a presence in itself. Whoever it was, they were watching. They were waiting. Liam's stomach churned as he realized that the nightmare wasn't over. Karen's manipulation might have been exposed, but the force behind her actions, the person controlling the drone, the one who had been pulling the strings all along, was still out there hidden in the shadows. For a long moment, Liam stood frozen, staring at the figure, his mind racing. Who was it? Why were they still watching him and Ella? What did they want? His instinct screamed at him to do something, anything, but he knew better than to rush in blind. He had to be smart, he had to protect Ella, and above all, he had to stay one step ahead. The figure in the distance didn't move, but as Liam watched, his heart pounding in his chest, the drone slowly began to rise higher into the sky, its humming sound growing louder for just a moment before it disappeared into the clouds. The figure remained, still watching. And for the first time, Liam knew with certainty that this was only the beginning of something much bigger than he had imagined. The last shot lingered on the distant figure, the ominous silence of the moment pressing in on him. It felt like a warning, an unspoken threat hanging in the air. And then, as the camera zoomed out, the screen faded to black. The tension remained unresolved as the future loomed uncertain. Liam's fight for his family was far from over. The days that followed were quiet but heavy with the lingering weight of everything Liam and Ella had endured. The storm had passed, both literally and metaphorically, but the marks it left on their lives would take time to fade. Liam had never felt such a profound mix of relief and resolve. The constant worry, the fear that had gnawed at him for days, was gone, but it had been replaced with something stronger, an unshakable determination to protect his daughter no matter the cost. Liam sat at the kitchen table one morning, his eyes focused on Ella, who was drawing quietly at the other end of the room. The soft sound of her pencil scratching across paper was oddly comforting. She had been quieter than usual, her face still holding the remnants of the exhaustion she had suffered. But there was something new in her, something resilient. Despite everything they had been through, she was still here, still fighting, and she was stronger for it. "Dad," Ella said, breaking the silence as she looked up from her drawing, her eyes meeting his. "Do you think things will be okay now?" Liam smiled softly, setting down his coffee cup. "I think things are already better. Not perfect, but better. And we'll make sure they keep getting better. Together." Ella nodded, her eyes bright with something that hadn't been there before, the spark of hope, of trust in the future. It was a small thing, but for Liam it meant the world. He had feared for so long that the storm would break her, that the strain of everything would prove too much. But she had weathered it just as he had, and in that strength he found his own. The investigation into Karen's actions moved forward, as expected, with the HOA being held accountable for their part in her manipulations. The charges were being filed, and though it would take time for the full extent of the legal ramifications to unfold, Liam knew it wasn't the outcome that mattered most. The real victory had been in exposing the truth, in breaking free from Karen's suffocating grip on their lives. Liam's eyes moved to the window again, and for the first time in days, he allowed himself to look at the world outside without the constant worry that had dominated his every thought. The sun was shining through the trees, the snow had started to melt, and the day felt full of potential. As he looked out into the distance, he realized something profound. He had always had the power to protect Ella. The fear that had paralyzed him, that had made him question his own strength, was gone. No matter what came next, whether it was Karen or something else entirely, he would do whatever it took to keep her safe. He would never let fear control him again. Ella was right. Things would be okay. They were okay. And with that final thought, Liam knew that no matter what the future held, he would face it head on, always standing by his daughter's side. He had found his strength, and it was in the love he had for her, a love that nothing, not even the storm they had weathered together, could take away. The past was behind them. The future was theirs to shape. What would you do if your family's safety was at risk? Would you stand up for them, no matter the cost? Join Liam and Ella as they fight for their lives, uncovering dark secrets and facing impossible odds. Follow their journey of survival, strength, and justice. Don't miss out. Stay tuned for more of their story. The battle is far from over.